Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Three Pines. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we had that opening, and once you saw that little girl, I was like, it had to be B. And you see that in conjunction with that opening with like Jean-Guy and Armand, when it's like how could God allow for something? I called it like Saint Anna's last episode. It's Saint Anthony's. Like how could he let like something like that happen? And Jean-Guy's like, how could any like human being let something like that happen? It's just the complicated. That's kind of like that nasty, because obviously it was all done in the God, because it was like nuns, and it was from a religious standpoint, like that what happened at Saint Anthony, and they'll probably justify it in like God's eyes, like what kind of God would do that, what kind of human being will sit by and be a part of, or even let that happen and think it was okay, So some interesting developments we find out in this episode. First and foremost, we ultimately end up finding out B lied to Armand and said she wasn't there when the others went to burn down St. Anthony's last episode. She was. And she says, like, right, she had her reasons. Well, they look into it and they found out that she had a brother. And that brother was one of the three boys that apparently drowned all those years ago. But then they go and see Arasawa, and she was actually at that school, and the rumor was like none of the kids at the school believed them when they were like, oh, those three boys went to the Bella Bella and drowned. And it's like, no, none of us believed that. And the moment she said that, I was like, they're buried there. I was like, that's why B was there. It wasn't just to burn the place down because she was hoping to get some answers. Well, it was probably that, but also she was probably hoping like, well, while I'm here, I might try and search for my brother and see if he's here. Maybe that's also, well, or maybe it was simply because like she herself needed to see the place burnt down. Maybe that's even more so reason, because it does seem like everyone in the town, like there is this communal thing of like everyone's there for B, and it's like because they know what that place, like the history of that place. So it isn't just to see stuff. It wasn't just to see stuff. It was the whole situation with everything related to that place. But I think it was more so like what that history meant to be, and so many others like her. But ultimately, Armand does dig up in the basement and find the remains, because Arasawa believed, like, right, we believe that those three boys are there. Now, we don't know if anyone else is buried there, because it's like, right, there are three bodies there could be more. And the sad thing is, Mark's dad, and who knows if Mark knew, like, he knew his dad was a part of some terrible stuff. Now, if he knew about that, who knows? So that might make you go feeling even more responsible, but I think that still doesn't take away from B's remarks last episode of, no, it's not on him to speak for us, especially for B, what she went through, what her brother went through, what she lost, when losing him and never getting any closure. Doesn't make it any easier. Like, you were, on some level, I was hoping, like, oh, maybe those three boys escaped, maybe they went off to live their lives. It's like, no. And the sad thing is, B blames herself, because she's like, right, the only reason why they found those three boys is because of me, because I was the one that got caught. So that made them know, like, all right, there might be some others. So the boys probably didn't have the largest leeway, because they're like, okay, you try to escape, so who's to say some others did? And I don't know if they immediately were like, okay, if you were trying to leave, your brother most likely tried to leave. So, but they probably just checked, like, okay, what kids aren't here? They checked off the list. He found them because apparently the caretaker, Mark's dad's office the janitor's office was like burned, and he was furious, and he knew kind of who was responsible or something like that. And so that's what that was. He lost his cool, and he ended up killing them, and he buried them down there. And it's a horrible situation. But once again, at the very least, B has some closure now to know exactly what happened to her brother. Does not make it easier, but as she said, facing your demons makes you stronger, as she kind of remarked last episode. Speaking of the Arasawa situation, her granddaughter, Kara, not Kara, it's Kara. I was debating like, oh, once again, seeing it written out, I was like, how do you pronounce that? Kara ended up confessing that she's the, like, that was a, like, it was like, okay, Isabel comes home and someone's basically, essentially, child services came to check up on her. What was it? It's something different there. It has a different name. It's like youth something, but it's like the equivalent to child services. And they're there because it's like, oh, we got an anonymous tip. And she's like, about allegations. And it's like, what allegations? And like, I can't tell you. I'm like, why can't you tell her? But then I'm like, well, I guess maybe the justification is if you know what the exact allegations are, you know exactly what to cover up if there is any nefarious stuff going on. You're like, okay, this is what they're looking for. I'm gonna dispose of everything that could prove that said thing is happening. But also, my thought was, if you know who made the allegations, then it becomes a situation of, oh, then if you know what allegations are made, maybe you can, like, kind of figure out who might have been the one responsible for those allegations. Because it's like, right, you work long hours. She's like, yes, because I'm a cop. Your girls are left alone. Like, no. They're always with my mother. They're always safe. And for, like, I think you have to also consider probably what Isabel's thinking and is a little freaked out about, because I think it's like, it's there where it's like, no, you're not going to take my girls from me, because it's like, that's sadly happened too often to her people. It's like, indigenous people, it's like your children were just like yanked right out of your arms for no good reason. It's just because other people decided to do that to you, So that's that. And I think maybe that's that deep rooted fear, because she was just like, no, this is crazy. You can't take my children away from me. But it's like, I think that fear of that, probably played a role, especially with all this St. Anthony stuff. I think that really, like, I think you could really allocate that to be a ancestral trauma, because I do believe that there is something there. It doesn't even have to just be allocated to ancestral trauma. I mean, it could just be like, no one hits. I feel like we know the history of, like, children being taken from indigenous families, so it's like it could spark that in you, So whether that's really what Isabel was thinking, maybe I'm putting too much into that, but, like, I mean, no parent wants to have their child, for one, taken away from them, and also being labeled a bad parent, So there's that, but I feel like you could also extrapolate, and once again, that could be just me putting too much into it, but you could correlate some of that with some of Isabel's dismay as well. Well, what was a development, I was like, okay, who made the allegations? For it to turn out to be, it was Kara, I was like, what? She was like, yeah, I wanted you to get off. I figured if you knew what it's like to miss a loved one, then you'd get off your ass and find my sister. I was like, do you know what you, like, they would have never found anything because Isabel's good. Well, I mean, maybe that came up before. I didn't realize she has, I think she has 2 daughters. Like, I didn't even know that. Maybe that came up earlier in some lines of dialogue and I just didn't remember. But I was like, that's jacked up. Because, like, that type of situation is like, I feel like those services keep records of stuff like that, and they'd be like, well, someone made some allegations against you, we didn't find anything, but we still might be keeping an eye on you. Like, she might be on a list that they like, oh, let's check in on, Isabel and her family from time to time. It's like, I get you have every right to be angry. For so long, so many people didn't look for your sister. Now it's like, right, people who were interested in looking for your sister kind of gave, but I get it. But it's like, to do that was so jacked up, especially, I get it, because you have your niece in your life, but you would hope. It's a complicated thing, because I'm like, I get your frustration, I get your anger, because you feel like no one's listening. It's, just kind of like, I think Missy did what she did because she felt like no one was listening. Or maybe, I think it was just like a combination of no one's listening, no one's paying attention, and feeling a lot of guilt on her own part, just feeling like she failed Blue in some shape or form. So I think a lot of that culminated there. But I was like, obviously, like, she wasn't going to, like, get all up in arms about it. But I was like, that's super messed up. And, like, she seemed apologetic, but also partially not, because she felt justified in her Kara felt justified in why she did what she did. I still think once again, I can understand, but I could still also be like, man, that's super fucked up what you did, putting her through that. But it's like, in your mind, you thought like you had to do what you had to do to get her to keep investigating, which ultimately they did, and she didn't stop investigating. That was before she found out you did what you did. But yeah, they looked over Kevin and Tommy's place one more time. She notices that the rug has indentions in it, like something was on it for a long period of time, like a table or something. Moves the rug and finds like what looks like, hey, this spot's been bleached down. Like, so it could be someone covering up something. So it does turn out there's blood. By the end of this episode, we still don't know if it was Blue's blood or not. It was definitely... Oh, no, it was... I think they did say it was Blue's blood, right? So they don't know if she died there. Now it's like a conversation of, okay, so now we need to find out whether or not Kevin's looking a lot more like a suspect, and maybe Tommy went with him to, kind of cover up whatever happened there. Like maybe it was an accident. Who knows what went down? So Kevin, but once again, the last time they talked about Kevin, it's like he ended up crossing the border. So we'll have to wait and see where things kind of go on that front. So there's that. Then picking up with Mark's murder, we find out the Peter thing went in a direction I was so certain about, because Gamache was thinking the same thing of like, yeah, this must be an affair situation. It's like, no, Peter was seeing him for therapy. I was like, interesting. I thought he moved the text messages last episode, like maybe he like hid them on his phone. I guess he did delete them, but I don't know. Maybe that was him deleting it from every spot. But it's like, no, when you delete it, you don't like really delete the data. It still can be retrieved. So they got all the text messages. It's like every message you sent, every picture that was sent. But it turns out it wasn't an affair that was going on. He went to therapy. There's some stuff in Peter's past and that's what I figured it had to be. I interpreted it as like, right, he's trying to cover up any like form of like, oh, there was something going on between me and Mark. Turns out he was trying to get Mark's laptop because his sessions, Mark's therapy notes with him are there, and he didn't want anyone reading them because they're private, and it's something that his Clara doesn't know about. Clara didn't like the fact is that Peter and Mark were spending so much time together, but she had nothing to do with the murder and stuff. Because she had this interesting conversation with Armand about, like, right, she doesn't take commissions when it comes to pictures. She draws people that she finds, like, when she sees something inside of them that maybe something that they're dealing with that maybe they're aware of, or maybe it's so deep inside that they're not aware of. So the fact that she drew Armand, I think, kind of speaks volumes, which we'll get to that in a second. But for her, it's like, yeah, I had nothing to do with this murder and stuff like that. So ultimately, Armand was like, I looked through Mark's notes enough to see that you were telling the truth, but I made sure to delete them because, right, that they are private and you have a right to that privacy, and gave him like a flash drive if it's on it. But it's like, you should tell your wife, because keeping this to yourself, for one, is not good for the soul, but it's also not good for a marriage, because Clara felt so, like, right, he's spending so much time with Peter's spending so much time with Mark, and it's just, it's going to take a toll on the relationship. Plus, there's always stuff, like, you holding stuff back, so. We still never found out what it was, but I think maybe it's something that will eventually come up. Because Armand only, like he said, he read enough to know it was true, being like, okay, these are probably notes. He probably didn't read anything specific. It's like, oh, okay, skimming, and it's like, okay, this is Mark's notes on Peter. That's all I need to know. I probably didn't even read anything specifically. He said just enough to know that you were telling the truth. So that was kind of an interesting development, because I was like, could that have, I was like, oh. I like I said, I was like, oh, and I think they set it up that way, even for, and I love that they immediately were like, no, it's not an affair. It was a secret therapy sessions. Like, I was giving him art lessons, and he was giving me therapy, like, in return. So I thought that was so interesting. So I thought that was kind of an interesting twist there. There's also the sad situation with Ruth sadly the baby duckling from last episode died. And she was like, right, I cracked open the egg because what Jean-Guy said last episode was true. The duckling just was, because she did that, the duckling wasn't strong. She didn't think about it. She was just like, right, I was trying to help. It's just, that's the complicated thing about nature. You never know, like, your interference can have a massive effect. But also, our mom was like, it's not your fault. You were trying to do the right thing, you know? And he kind of talks about it from the perspective of, like, it's just, like, it's kind of nature. Like, sometimes you can't control, like, sometimes nature just plays out the way it does. And ends up, like, quoting Emily Dickinson to Ruth. And he's like, yeah, I used to love Emily Dickinson. She was my favorite until I read Ruth. And it's like Ruth likes Armand, but she loves to bust his balls too. Even being like, it's not Clara or Peter. I know what I know. So how about instead of hypothesizing, you go actually find, instead of hypothesizing, numbnuts, go find some actual fucking evidence. And like Armand kind of smiles and laughs because he's like, he likes her a lot. Because I mean, for one, he's a fan of her work, but also it's like, I think once again, I love the crude nature in which they make her character talk, because she's a no-nonsense person. It's like, I'll speak my fucking mind. Even if everyone else is afraid to, I'm not afraid to hold my punches. I'm like, you probably think of like, I'm old. Like, why do I have to, like, you know, be tactful in the way I speak, you know? So. But it's interesting, too, how that ties into Armand, because I didn't talk about it last episode, but there was that blue jay that ended up, like, flying into his window, and his mom ended up giving, well, we found out this episode, the feather he got from his mom was taken from that dead bird, and he ultimately ends up finding the nest, and it's like, and it ends up, that element ends up playing a focal point in this episode about, like, right, a bird, you know, a mother bird and a nest of chicks will, like, freak out, you know, so it's like, that ends up coming full circle, but we'll get to that soon enough. Because Armand did talk about it to Cree in episode 1, I believe, yeah, about I think his mom died first, and then his dad. Both of his parents are gone, because we got a little bit of a scene with him and his mom. So I think maybe that feather's just, it's a culmination of just a lot. And I think that kind of goes along with like Clara's talking about, like, right, you got so much. I mean, I think the Two Rivers stuff is kind of on his mind, but I think still some stuff from the past related to his mom and just losing her. And I think a lot of that plays a role in kind of what's there that Armand might be aware of, but also might not be aware of, what's kind of like buried deep down. So I really like that whole thing with Jean-Guy and Isabel too, where it's like they're going downstairs in the basement and like them laughing, and because they're both kind of scared, it's like, oh, it's a raccoon, and they're both laughing about it. Then they find the secret passage and then end up scaring each other again. It's like, you didn't think I was actually going to stay down there by myself, right? Which immediately you kind of go like, oh, is there like an Isabel and Jean-Guy situation going on? I'm not quite sure. But found evidence where like the killer left Mark's phone behind. They could have easily like, hey, I slipped in, killed Mark, and then slipped back out through the secret passage and joined up with the others without them realizing it. So anyone that was in the house at that time could have broken off enough to, you know, because not everyone had eyes on everyone at every moment in time. So it came up that at the end, like, B's the one that told Armand about the argument he caught between Hayden, Sophie, and Mark. And I figured there was something there. The way, like, I felt like Hayden was a little too, like, holding on too tight to his daughter. And I didn't know, like, I didn't, like I said, plus, like, once again, her drinking and stuff like that, like I said, I interpreted it as, like, maybe there was something going on between Hayden and Mark, and if there was something happening between him and Peter, like, it would have been, like, I guess a lover's quarrel type of situation. Turned out not to be the case. Right people involved to some extent, but not the right circumstances. Turns out that Mark was going, well, I love that. It's like, oh, here's some messages, voicemails and messages back and forth between Sophie and Mark. And I love Jean-Guy being like, oh, they were having an affair. And she's like, how about you don't presume? How about you listen and before you assume? And then Armand just kind of looked at him like, and just Junky's almost like, just go ahead, play it then, you know. But it turns out Mark had a stash of like $100K, and he was going to use it, some of it, to buy Sophie a plane ticket, and he was going to get her started at a different school, a different place than what Hayden wanted, and that's what this was all about. Because Hayden didn't know all what was going on, but he knew, like, right, he thought Mark, oh, my best bud did stuff behind my back. It's like, oh, you were trying to take my daughter away from me because Sophie wanted her independence. Her dad, like, latched onto her too much. It's like, right, you have your condition. You're never going to survive out in the world. The world is so evil. It's so bad. But the problem is, it's like, yeah, but you never gave her a chance to spread her wings because you were so overprotective. And because of that, you know, he says that he didn't mean to do it. It's like, from what we saw, it seemed pretty intentional. You were there on the steps, you kicked him down the stairs, and then you bashed his head in with a rock. That seemed pretty like, yeah, it was heat of the moment, maybe, but it was also like, it wasn't like oh man, I accident, like we were arguing, I pushed him down the stairs. It's like, no, you kicked him down the stairs and then bashed his head in repeatedly with this rock. So it's like, that's where it's kind of like, yeah. But for him, it's like, you have no idea, like, I was trying to protect my daughter, you know? And it's such a sad circumstance, but it's like, right, your daughter isn't a little girl anymore. You should leave it up to her to decide what she was like, right, the whole going to this musical textile, like, that was my decision, and I'm the one that asked Smart to keep it a secret because she just needed to get away, because she's like, you're trying to limit me, saying like my condition, it's like, no, even with my condition, she's like, there's other people with my condition who've lived a normal life, and he just, because it's a situation of, I think it is just hey, like, her mom died at 3 years old, and for such a long time, it was just him and her, and it's just like, wait, this person who's like supposed to be my best friend, who's supposed to be there for her, who in his mind, Mark is like, no, I'm looking out her best interest, I'm doing what she wants, and he eventually wanted to tell Hayden the truth, but we don't know if that's like how Hayden found out, or if he found out on his own, because he was under the impression, he's like, oh, are you two sleeping together? And she's like, no, it wasn't even like that. It's like, yeah, you killed her godfather, like the one person that was kind of on her side, which, yes, you loved her, but I think, like, upon, like, losing her mother and finding out about her condition, once again, he just wanted to protect her from the world, and he ended up just holding on to her too tightly, and it smothered her. It became too much. That's why, because he doesn't even know that she turned to drinking, you know? And if he ever found out, it's like, oh, wow, really? And because the reason why he was able to find out is because Armand figured this out because he called Richard, and it turns out that Armand was I guess he gave Cree piano lessons, so he would have been at the house enough to know the layout of it to be able to, you know, secretly find a way around it, you know. So that made him a suspect. But going back to that bird situation from his memory, Armand tells, because Agent Nicole's like, how did you figure it out? And he was like, a mother bird, if you get too close to the nest, the mother bird will freak out if you get too close to her chicks. So that's what happened with Hayden in this regard. The bear situation was also interesting too, where it's just kind of like, I guess you could make the argument it was almost like nature intervening, because it's like, right, because the bear gotten away. I mean, Hayden wasn't going to stop, and he was freaking Sophie out, which is how fast he was driving, not pulling over when the police were trying to get to him. So it's like, luckily the bear was in the way and ended up stopping it. So, and the bear just kind of went about its way. It's almost like interesting how nature found its way of kind of working out like that. So, but at the very end, you know, with the case solved, one last thing in the episode is St. Anthony's finally burnt down, and everyone's there. And obviously, Bee's got a big smile on her face, but she kind of nods towards him, and Armand kind of nods back. It's like, right, we won't, like, considering the evil that is this place, because even Armand had said at the beginning, wondering, like, maybe the evil that was St. Anthony's. It's like, right, this quiet place where, like, yeah, there's a lot of people here. There's a community here that look after each other. There's been 2 murders in a year here. That is like, yeah, maybe that evil from that place has seeped down, and maybe it'll at least get rid of some of that evil. I highly doubt it. I'm sure there's still going to be more murders in this. Because I'm like, yeah, it's a pretty small town. But it's like, yeah, I mean, look at all the stuff that went down in Haven, if you've ever watched Haven, with everything that went down, and that's a pretty small town, so small town doesn't mean anything. So, but it's just like, yeah, it's time. You know, it's not a thing of, oh, let's forget about the past, but it's like, no, this building and everything it stands for needs to be destroyed, because they kind of, all those spirits that are most likely trapped, they're probably allowed to finally be free, you know, for the first time in all those years. All the terrible stuff that's associated with that place, those memories don't go away, those scars are still there, but it's like, right, there's some solace in freeing everyone bound to that place, whether it's like Arisawa or whether it's Bee and her brother. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.